If you're watching this video, that means that my mentor, or Rut, who gave me an opportunity to spread my wings out of the, right fresh out of high school when I was 18, Lynn Williams and his wife Alma, and hopefully the Dyers and a few others, gave me the opportunity to prove my infinite science to the scientific community, which includes continuity and carbon physics versus support data physics, which is what our physics is. Carbon built everything in our world. It's every living thing, everything that has ever lived, everything that is living now, and everything that will ever live is a carbon derivative or a carbon incarnation. And we don't even use the word carbon. Everything in our body, every process, our entire body is controlled by carbon. And the only way that carbon could mastermind our existence is if it's a collective of one. We already know that one cell of DNA contains the genetic blueprint of existence, but it's much bigger than, including viruses, but it's much bigger than that. It updates in real time. Because why else a virus is a failure in the carbon world? You know, carbon does everything it can. In the carbon world, every force and element is contained or opposed before it becomes destructive, which was first espoused by Albert Einstein in a paper so obscure I can't even find it anymore, and he stated two elements in perfect opposition. Nobody else understood what that meant, but I've restated it. It's elements of perfect opposition, and I knew exactly what it was. It's the very foundation of our existence. When the Big Bang happened, you know, and the planet started spinning and you had all these major forces, what happened is these major forces expanded into each other, then they snapped back into a state of neutrality. In a carbon world, carbon does everything it can to maintain a state of neutrality. You know, viruses, it can't anticipate every mutation. You know, and Corona escaped the carbon-filled neutrality, which means China can't even be blamed for it or responsible for it. You know, because it's a carbon failure, and that's why it's in our DNA. Because the irresponsibility in the United States, we should have already mutated into more versions of it, and we haven't. That's because carbon is working furiously to prevent future mutations, and the plagues did not come back because carbon adapted and anticipated all the mutations, so it shouldn't come back. And to understand what carbon is a rock-like substance that's an element on the periodic table that had life breathed into it, and it learned to, number one, build substance by stacking, which is how it builds our body, how one cell becomes 75 trillion, because carbon stacks incarnations of itself. It also had the inherent ability to understand it needed to build the fuel first to fuel growth, and the derivative processes to fuel that growth, and inferior incarnations to feed on. So it feeds on itself, so it had that inherent ability, while also learning how to self-perpetuate. Science says that all cells have a shelf life. That is far from the reality of it. The reality of it is carbon has to self-perpetuate, which is the very essence of life. And we have not answered what life is, and I just did. It's a self-renewal process, and that process breaks down as we age. And, you know, everything I'm bringing to the table will change everything. You know, we look at everything on a singular basis, but science already knows that most every single result involves two or more elements. They see the opposition all the time. They just don't see it. They're seeing it through blinders. So, you know, you're going to have to be patient with me on articulating, and I have a lot to get out, and there's so many different ways that I could go through it. You know, but we're going to have to struggle through this together. You know, you need to understand that everything inside me belongs to you. My body, everything else. My life is no longer mine, it's yours. And it belongs to everybody equally. I mean, this is infinite science that's going to turn our society upside down, but we don't need to overreact to it, okay? There's going to be a lot of changes, and you just have to understand that I understand implications on everything. And hopefully we've already confirmed that I do in fact bring infinite science, and I've already started building our existence and answered things that are going to be you're going to be shocked about using simple logic and deductive reasoning. And because of that, the intellectual rights of the people exceed the wealth of the world times infinity. And so hopefully the debt's already been eliminated. You know, we're going to transition to a science-driven society rather than money, because we're all square pegs being pounded into round holes. Most people aren't qualified for what they're doing, or they were forced to take whatever they could get. And that is no longer going to be true, but we've got to be smart about it, and everybody needs to just do as said. And in the initial phase, I'm going to be talking at you, but it'll quickly become redundant, because I'm you and you're going to become me. You know, so there's no need for me to talk to myself. So carbon is God's creator, and God has to exist. The very fact that carbon has to build a baby with cystic fibrosis says that carbon does not have permission to change a genetic blueprint, even though science agrees that it holds all of existence inside, which includes perfection. You know, carbon doesn't want to build defective babies, but it doesn't have a choice. God has to exist because God is the blueprints and carbon is God's creator. So God can manipulate carbon. And to give you an example, the Immaculate Conception. Science already says everything is in, the entire genetic blueprint is within carbon. But they don't qualify what that means. Well, that means it goes all the way back to the infinite power that breathed life into a rock. The rock is in there, and everything in between, and everything yet to be. It's all in there. So that includes a hermaphrodite. So carbon cannot change a blueprint, but carbon mutates all the time in self-defense. You know, and there's no such thing as gene therapy, but we get lucky every once in a while. And what we've done is we provoke carbon into rotating the genetic blueprint, because when carbon mutates, it's always going to advance towards perfection. And synonymous with that is it rotates to the correct gene sequences for self-perpetuation. Barrett's esophagus is a genetic mutation, because the stomach, esophagus, and throat cells share commonality. And in my case, my esophagus was on the verge of collapsing. And so what happens is the cells invert or turn inside out, and they're not really stomach cells, they're hybrid cells. But most importantly, the genes, it rotates your genetic structure, and it rotates the genes to the correct self-perpetuation gene sequences, which are now hybrid cells. Because if it continued, you know, replacing hybrid cells with esophagus cells, you're going to have a bigger disaster than you would have had the stomach acid eaten through the lining. You know, so in self-defense, and it's as uniform as it can be. And you know, science theorizes that somehow sloughed off stomach cells migrate upstream and take over the esophagus, which stands on chest. They're dead cells. They're just any way that can happen. But the cells are so much alike, they are more alike than they are different, and they just turn inside out, instantaneously. It's instantaneous inversion. And, you know, the reason I've always understood a lot of this, you know, I always knew I understood something, I just didn't know what it was. And the reason why I understand it now is I myself, my intellect genetically mutated. And what happened on that is, as a musician, I could not figure out how our musical scale could be perpetual, which ironically is faulty, because our God's musical scale is infinite, which must always advance, and perpetuality is circular. So it was faulty. It was a faulty premise to begin with. But anyway, on October 28, 2018, I said, by God, I'm going to answer this one way or another. And I was trying to understand shared notes, which is what the sharps are. And you're missing 2 sharps. So I did not see a continuous path so that you could complete one cycle, because I am correct that you have to complete at least one cycle before you can start repeating as perpetuality. And so I pulled out the double octagonal, and by God, I was going to figure out what was going on. And somehow I inverted B and E, which meant lay them on their side, a reverse polarity, and I thought I was there, and I thought I had it when I felt my forehead shift. Bone does not shift. So I braced. I had no idea whether I was getting dizzy and I was getting ready to fall, but your forehead is not supposed to shift. It didn't take anything at all to realize that I wasn't going to fall. And what I was missing was, because I was very adept at transcendental meditation, I quickly realized my train of thought was gone. My forehead was raw. My head was lighter because I lost mass, and it was starkly empty and quiet. I mean, it's still a vacuum. My brain is sleeping right now because this is all muscle memory. I don't need my brain to be talking, you know, because I've already done it again. It's muscle memory. So I realized immediately what was wrong. But you know, when you advance your intellect, and what I am now is called devoid of thought and function, which means my head is forever empty, and conscious thought barely exists. It's like a cloud that dissipates in your head. And I'm on the outside looking in now, and you know, it was scary to even drive for months with an empty head. It just was. And the first thing I noticed is that a driver would do nothing to me, and I'd react in rage, and I had nothing to drive it. I mean, I felt silly because it was hollow. You know, I'd start yelling, and I couldn't think of anything to yell. It was just, there was no reason for it, and there was nothing to drive it. You know, racism, stress, everything else works the same way. It's an inherent impulse. It begins as an impulse, and then what happens is the circular network takes it and tries to exacerbate it above the previous event. You know, science believes that the forehead is part of the brain, and it's not even integral. And the only way, since the bone can't move on my forehead, the only possibility is that, and I know that's what happened. In fact, I went back and checked the carpet, is it basically fell out of my head. And what I was feeling was it sliding across the bone, which tells you right there it's of a substance we don't understand. And we've never detected it. We believe that it's one in our head and it's two. And the fact that it spins should tell you, because we aren't meant to spin. Spinning makes us dizzy and confused. So it's not, it is not anything positive. It is our evil or dysfunctional half. And we'll never understand, I'll never understand how carbon pulled this off. And it has not been easy on me. But I could always rationalize the times my chemistry was upside down, because your forehead floods chemicals. Look at what happens when you stress and rage and get mad and everything. You know, it really does a number on your body. So my entire chemistry feeds changed. My blood chemistry had to change because carbon could not make up a new intellect on the spot, which means I have a people, they're just not in this dimension. You know, carbon can only rotate to an existing blueprint because God is the blueprints. There's just absolutely no question about that. But carbon always advances when it reacts in self-defense. Okay, you know, I'm trying to get all this out, so sometimes I will pause. Back to the mutation. So what happened is when, due to an inherent vitamin deficiency and poor diet, it finally caught up with me, and the only logical explanation is on 10/28/18 that my body initiated a frontal lobe stroke impulse, because that's the only thing that can change your consciousness, and it's never very good, you know. In fact, a common happenstance with that is that you defecate in public. You use a bathroom wherever you're at, you know. So only God could have manipulated my carbon to initiate that stroke at the precise moment I had my frontal lobe and temporal lobes locked and loaded. I mean, I was straining my logic. I wanted to figure out how that continuous path existed, even though it doesn't, and it doesn't matter. And it was locked and loaded. That allowed carbon, that gave carbon the opportunity to rotate in self-defense to an advanced intellect, which rotated me away from the collision of that to a point in the future. And at the same time, it would have had to, you know, initiate all the new gene sequences that would be associated with it, because you can't keep flooding chemicals from something that doesn't exist. I mean, everything, my entire blood chemistry had to change, and we'll never figure out, although we can figure out the physics of what happened, we'll never figure out how carbon saved me. Because your forehead is 50%. It's your evil half. You know, it's 50% of what you are, and continuity says when you lose 50%, the model collapses. And it wasn't easy a lot of times, but I could rationalize it because I knew carbon. I doubt carbon had ever rotated intellects before. You know, and so carbon was fighting its best. And I felt lucky to be alive, and it has not been easy, and I've only been a mature, recovered adult for 3 weeks now. So it took just shy of 3 years for me to really recover, because there are just so many internal residuals and everything else. You know, a month ago I could not talk this calmly or sit here this calmly. You know, without getting wound up, and so I still had a lot of internal forces and conflicts. I am not capable of internal conflict now. I'm nothing that can drive it, nothing that can create it. If I have an inherent impulse, that's all it can be, because I don't have a spinning network that can take it and exacerbate it into something different. You know, inherent racism is, you know, what an inherent impulse is any disproportionate reaction to external stimuli. And even I have internal prejudices as to physiques, and, you know, but they're easily ignored, but you can't ignore them on sexual preferences. You know, if you have an internal prejudice against a certain physique, the last thing you want to do is try to make it work, because you're going to fail. You're just going to fail. So on racism, rage, whatever else what happens is you have a genetic propensity to feel that, to feel rage or hate, and neither the heart or brain can hate. So what happens is you see someone of objectionable color and you think it's real because your entire body reacts, but it's an impulse. But what happens if you accept the charges, then it goes into the circular network and it's exacerbated. I mean, it's just going to keep pounding that unwanted, repetitive thought and keep you thinking about it as long as you allow it to think about it. You know, I was very adept at transcendental meditation, so I could interrupt mine at will. And so if I was stressing or going down a road I didn't want to, I could interrupt it, and then it would go away. You know, so I knew immediately what was missing. And boy, I tell you what, you don't get to start as an adult when you when your intellect advances. You know, it's taken 3 years to grow up. And right after it happened, and you know, let's cover infrastructure a little bit, because my Facebook archives are going to be released. Hopefully they have all the hidden posts back to 1028, because I wrote a Bible right after it happened. I mean, I didn't know what I understood. I just understood a lot. And there's going to be a lot of things that I've forgotten that I talk about that are going to hold some water and need to be pursued. So, you know, the one thing we can't do, since we're transitioning to a science-driven society, is we can't overwhelm what little infrastructure we have, because we don't have a lot of infrastructure. We got the military, you know, we got the churches, we got education, we have the drug cartels. You know, government will be reallocated, because in a science-driven society, we're all going to become our brain. So why don't I cover that? Because it's pretty easy to take the first step in becoming your brain. You can be so close to me and be adept that you have barely any internal strife. So the first thing is, you have to realize it's two. Your forehead is not your brain. It's not. So what you need to do is you clear your thought as much as you can. Then you try to think really deeply about something and try to feel that conscious thought in the very back. Because, you know, your conscious thought is in the back of your head. That's where mine is. But it gets sucked through that circular network. So it still comes forward, but it goes through that rotation. So you really don't know it's there. So number one, just try to feel your brain. And, you know, some people are going to be more adept than others, and if you can't do it, transcendental meditation isn't easy. But there's going to be a lot of people that it's easy for, and you're going to be you're going to have so many videos and everything else that are helping you do it, because you become stress-free. And who wouldn't want to be stress-free? And every ounce of evil that's ever happened comes out of the forehead of man. That's all there is to it. Your forehead wants you to, if you commit suicide, that's a victory. It wants to lead you into dysfunction. And when the spinning reaches a point where it overpowers the brain, that's when mental illness sets in. I can't dement. There isn't any way for my brain to dement or my thoughts to corrupt, because my conscious will would have to corrupt. And it would have to be an intentional effort on my part, and I doubt that I can trick my brain. So try to feel your brain, and then what you want to do, and you can just repeat it for now, but you're wanting to make your train of thought train on 1, 2, 3, calm. 1, 2, 3, calm. You know, you're repeating a mantra is what you're doing. And I'd say 1, 2, 3, calm for now. But each language will have a common mantra, because what's happening now is this is a final conflict between good and evil. You know, if we're not money driven, then most crime goes away And if we're one, you know, just so many things go away. But it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to have to do it a little bit at a time. So, you know, if we're all repeating the same mantra, I have no idea, and of course 1, 2, 3 calm might suck in another language, so everybody wants something really cool, and hopefully it starts shrinking and it goes the way of the tail. I have no idea what will happen but we can eliminate evil 100% with transcendental meditation. I mean, that's all it is. And you're going to be like me, and every time you start to stress, every time your head starts spinning, you stop it. You know, and I believe 100% that if the brain has not atrophied, that on a lot of the mentally ill, their brain is still in there and it's fine. But what happens after mental illness sets in, and the basically your train of thought is the victor, is it's going to start shutting off resources. It's going to start causing brain damage. It's going to do everything it can to atrophy your brain, because TOTN is self-destructive. You know, death is what it wants. Death is a victory for TOTN. It's pure dysfunction and evil, and it's looking to spin you through that network. So, okay.